Well, good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thrive in 2025, a monthly webinar series brought to you by ArcPoint Labs, your single source employer solutions provider, empowering business leaders to create compliant, high performing, safe, and healthy workplaces that thrive. Today's Thriving Thursday topic: building a culture of well being, 7 essentials for protecting people and yourself during the holidays and beyond. My name is Ryan West, your host and Thrive specialist, and proud to share the virtual floor today with a prolific leadership trainer who is also the host of the new YouTube channel, Inside the Team with Jesse Favre. Before we dive in, 3 brief announcements. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted to ArcPoint's website by end of day tomorrow. So if you'd like an encore presentation, perhaps you think a colleague would benefit, simply visit arcpointlabs.com/webinars, and then scroll towards the middle of the page. Second, ArcPoint is proud to be a recertification provider with HRCI and SHRM. So if you are a credentialed HR professional, you'll receive 1 RCE and 1 PDC at the end of today's session. But to receive these credits and a certificate of attendance, you must attend the entire session. And lastly, we invite you to spend just a moment of your time to complete the post-webinar survey. The survey link will be posted in the chat towards the end of the hour. Simply click on the link, follow the prompts, and know that your honest feedback is anonymous. It's also valued and sincerely appreciated. If you haven't already done so, please go to the chat to say hello. Let us know where you're logging in from. Perhaps also list one thing you'd like to learn from our speaker today, perhaps a question that you may have for Jesse. Please use the chat for engaging with each other, for sharing comments or short stories relevant to today's topic, but please use the Q&A function for submitting questions. We want to make sure that our speaker can see them and can answer them. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Jesse Favre. Jesse is the founder of Jesse Favre Business Solutions, LLC, and a leadership trainer with dual master's degrees in business and social work from Washington University in St. Louis. Since 2023 alone, she has delivered more than 1,000 presentations on well-being, innovation, and collaboration, helping leaders strengthen the human dynamics that make teams thrive. I must say, as a fellow trainer, that 1,000 number in 2 years is quite remarkable. Now, Jesse's work draws on vast hospital leadership experience, mental health first aid certification, and a deep understanding of workplace culture. She is a member of the International Employee Assistance Professionals Association, or EPA, Speakers Bureau, and also recently launched a new YouTube talk show called Inside the Team with Jesse Favre, where she explores the human side of work and candid conversations with leaders and therapists. If today's session resonates with you all, I encourage you to check out her channel and consider subscribing. A link to her channel will be posted in the chat. On a personal note, I first met Jessie in January of this year when she presented for my EPA Indiana chapter on sleep hygiene. And my initial thought was, sleep hygiene, how is she going to make this engaging? And she knocked it out of the park. She took what I would consider to be a typically dry topic and turned it into an informative and enlightening session that engaged our entire membership. As soon as it was over, I hopped onto Google, left a review, and I told myself, I'm going to ask her to speak again at some point. And today is that point. So Jesse, welcome to the ArcPoint Network. We're so grateful to have you here today.
Well, thank you for that very, very warm welcome. And speaking of warm welcomes, it is not warm where I'm at. So I am currently in St. Louis, and I will tell you all, I flew from LA this week to St. Louis. It was a real shock to the system. So if you've not already used the chat, put an emoji in there and let me know what your weather is like. I want to see who else is struggling right now. And if you're having warm weather, I'm going to be happy for you. I'm going to make that decision to just be happy for you. Here we go. Okay, you got sunglasses on. Good for you. Truly welcome everybody. So today we're going to talk about 7 essentials for protecting people, which includes yourself during the holidays and beyond, because a lot of what we're talking about will be relevant regardless of what time of year it is. So, very quickly, for the folks who recently dialed in, my background is in social work and business, and I specialize in human behavior and mental health in the workplace as a leadership trainer and speaker. Okay, so I'm seeing some other people are struggling too. It looks like it's very chilly in Cincinnati. I can relate to this. Okay. So, in terms of the agenda for today, we're going to start by just setting the stage for holiday stress because this is a time of year where stress levels tend to go up. And I'm going to show you some data on that. So, given what we know about holiday stress, what do we do with that in terms of stepping up for the people around us and taking care of ourselves? That's going to get us into what I'm going to call today the seven essentials. So, we will talk about seven well-being tips, and you can think of this as an audit. So, be thinking about your own practice, your own organization. Where do you feel like maybe you have some super strengths? And where are some areas that you might feel like you could optimize or run some experiments or pilots? And I'm going to give you lots of tools and frameworks that you can test. And then we will have some time at the end for Q&A. So you are welcome to put questions into the Q&A, like Ryan said, and we'll hold some time at the end to go through those. And then I'll make sure that you get some contact info as well if you want to keep in touch. Okay, folks. If you have special requests, you can drop those in at any point, and I will do my best to accommodate. I love a good challenge, so if anything's coming up that you want to talk about, you can let me know. In the meantime, I did want to share some data. So, some of you may have seen this data before. This was reported by the American Psychological Association in 2023. And before we get into all of the bar graphs that we have here, high level, here's what we know from this survey. Only 7% of US adults who were surveyed said that their stress decreases during the holiday season. For everybody else, it stays the same or it gets worse. So you may look at that and say, yeah, that checks out. But really think about this because this is the time of year where a lot of employees are using their PTO, they're connecting with friends and family. And so one may assume stress would actually get better, but it doesn't. And so then the question is why? So if you start looking at the top drivers of stress according to the survey, the very number one thing is money. There are some systemic things that are happening right now that are creating a lot of pressure. And so my hunch would be in 2025, this figure could be even higher. But you can see the top driver here for holiday stress, spending too much or not having enough to spend. If you look at the next driver, it's gifts. So it's kind of interesting to see that money is going to be one of the top things that's coming up. And also, there's more stress that's going on than just the holiday season because we're also getting to end of year. So I want to see for you all in your organizations, what are some of the forms of end of year stress that you are hearing people talk about? Yep, review season. And so that can be really difficult, especially if this is occurring at the same time that people are taking time off. Because if you're doing a review, well, you got to have somebody who's there to do the review with and also have that manager availability for that, plus all of the prep work that goes into review season. Oh my gosh, I'm feeling this. Sick family members. If you have reactions, do we all have reactions here? I don't know if we have reactions, or maybe you can drop into the chat. Anybody else dealing with the head cold that doesn't end right now? I'm on day 20 something. And so I am not alone. And so, yes, if you have sick family members or you yourself have been under the weather, that's going to add a layer of stress. With all of these things, I'm seeing fatigue in the chat. So, plus one to that. You have people who are traveling. And by the way, when we think about travel, oftentimes this involves change in time zones. Ryan was talking about sleep fitness earlier. Traveling across the country is also often a cause of disrupted sleep. That creates a lot of other forms of stress. Job cuts, deadlines, benefit renewals. I've been hearing that a lot right now. Yeah, and then all of this pressure to feel like you're performing. So absolutely. So, for all these reasons and more, we know that this is the time to really start to think about how are we going to check in on people and how are we going to show up for ourselves. Yeah, and somebody said open enrollment stress is real. I have heard this many times, so I'm giving you a big virtual heart. That is a lot of work to try to coordinate. Yep. So let's think about strategy. If we know that all of this is building up right now, what is it that we can actually do about this? And that's where we're going to get into what I'm going to call today as the seven essentials. And so we're going to drop into the chat right now a checklist, and this is going to give you a summary of everything that we're talking about today. On top of this checklist, you are also going to get a copy of the slides. And I share this right now just to say that if you have a sense of overwhelm, we're going to give you this stuff. So there's no need to take notes. If taking notes helps, absolutely keep pen and paper out, but we will get you set up with resources. So we're going to go through this 7-step checklist, and we're going to start with spotting the signals. So I wanted to start by just pulling apart two different concepts that often get spoken about when we talk about mental health at work, and that is signs and symptoms. A lot of times people use that interchangeably, but there are some differences here. So when we talk about signs, these are the things that you can spot. These are the observable things. When we talk about symptoms, we usually are talking about a subjective experience. And if you think about vulnerability in the workplace, in a lot of cases, we don't know somebody's subjective experience, nor are we in a position to diagnose or treat. So let's be clear on that, right? But in the workplace, a lot of times people are going to have a water level that's really, really high. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So I work a lot of times with individual contributors as well. And I'll say, talk to me. What are some of the reasons you don't go to HR or you wouldn't talk to a supervisor if you're having a hard time? And I will share with you, this is my family feud board, the top responses that I get. The number one thing that I hear, and I think this may surprise people leaders, is they don't want to be a burden. So when I ask leaders what they think the answer is, they're like, oh, well, they don't like me. What I hear from individual contributors across sectors is they don't want to be a burden. In a lot of cases, they will say, I like my people leader so much that I don't want them to feel this stress right now. So that's what I tend to hear. And I would say right underneath that on my family feud board is going to be, I have a performance review coming up, or I'm trying to get a raise or a promotion. And so I don't want to share that I'm struggling on a day-to-day basis, right? And then I would say, people would say, well, my supervisor or HR, these aren't my besties at work. And that's fair enough, right? So these are some of the reasons that people may not share their subjective experience. And that can make it hard, but it's not impossible to check in on somebody because what we're going to look for are the signs or the signals. So when there is any kind of mental health challenge, there's typically a shift from the norm in energy, mood, and or somebody's behavior. These are the three things. And if you think about seeing a shift, it gets really difficult if you are in a remote team or a hybrid team where you're not having conversations of like, hey, how was your weekend? How would you know if somebody isn't their typical self? And so I actually want you to drop into the chat. If you are in a remote or hybrid team, what are some of the things that you all do or encourage leaders to do in your organization to have those informal, what I like to call coffee pot moments of like we wait by the coffee pot while it brews and chit chat? What do you do in those environments? And as you all drop in, I will just share. I try to create the coffee moments. And so I have even put things on a calendar, 5 minutes. Let's virtually get some coffee. Let's sit with our coffee cups and let's chat just like we were in the break room. Yeah, somebody said check in every 2 weeks at the least. And when you're checking in, really think about what the mode is because it's very different to send an email and say, just want to see how things are going versus actually getting on the phone or getting on some sort of web call so that you can lay eyes on that person if possible. Love this, right? Beautiful suggestions coming through. Start meetings with chit chat. The reason that I'm giving this snaps is I have a background in performance improvement, which tends to be all about efficiency. And so I've worked with a lot of people that are like, we have to get to the point. There is a point to chit chat. There is a certain efficiency to chit chat. Chit chat is really powerful. And in fact, if you want to read more about the power of building trust, the power of small talk, I'm going to drop a name in the chat. Some of you have probably seen Paul Zach's work. He's a neuroeconomist who's done a lot of research in this area. So I would say if you're worried about the efficiency of chit chat, have a timer, right? When it gets to the end of 5 minutes, you jump into your agenda. Or you could say something like, I know this is an awkward transition, but we're going to go ahead and jump in now. Okay, I have to read this out loud just for the joy of it. Somebody said I host a bi-weekly happies and crappies. That I have not heard, so thank you for that. So this is just chatting about life. Yep, coffee chats. Bring up the personal stuff. Yeah, and when you do it, it sends a signal. We're going to talk more about social contagion, but that's a really powerful move. Yep. So when we think about a shift from the norm in terms of energy, mood, and behavior, what does that look like in the domain of work? Can be a lot of different things. You may be working with somebody and you notice that there is some sort of change in how they're interacting with other people. Maybe it seems like they're a little bit snippy, or maybe you're noticing that somebody's having a hard time with their relationship with their supervisor. Could happen. You could have somebody who's showing up and they seem a little bit spaced out and there's more errors in their work than usual. Could be an indicator. You may have somebody whose energy level seemingly has dropped and maybe there's social withdrawal. They're not walking a lap around the building with their coworkers like they used to. They're not speaking up in meetings. Could be. But with all of these things, you're only seeing this tip of the iceberg, like I said earlier. You don't necessarily know what's under the surface, and we always have to remember that. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you're working with somebody and they seem really tired. And let's go as far as to say they tell you they're not sleeping well. I want you to drop into the chat so you can think fast, not hard. What's a reason that somebody may not be sleeping well that's not directly tied to mental health? Illness. Yep. Could be finances, caring for sick parents, new babies, hormones. Yeah, I mean, somebody may have a sports injury. We don't know what's going on. So you always have to acknowledge that there's something that's going on under the surface. It's not our job in this situation to say, mental health challenge, right? We're not doing a diagnosis. We're not treating somebody. What we're doing is we're looking for a shift from the norm. You're looking for just enough information to say this person isn't their usual self. That's what you need to know to say, you know what, I should probably check in. But keep in mind, even if you check in with somebody and they say, yeah, I've had some stress, not all stress is created equal. This is one of my favorite ways to think about stress. If you look at the x axis, you will see stress. If you look at the y axis, you'll see performance. I know I have worked with many of employees who have told me it would actually be ideal to have a stress-free work environment. And I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's not. You're going to be so bored and y'all aren't going to get anything done. That's not ideal. I promise you. I know it sounds nice, maybe for a vacation, but it's not ideal. So, some of you are talking about deadlines being a source of stress right now. If you think about deadlines, if you didn't have any deadlines, you may not get work done. If you have a good, healthy deadline, that could be a motivating factor, could be good, beneficial stress, also known as eustress. So, EU stress, one word, I'll drop it in the chat. Fun vocabulary, eustress. So, to some degree, we know that stress could actually improve performance at work, but the problem is stress is incremental. And even if we have something like eustress, like a deadline, if eustress becomes too intense or it's chronic in nature, it can very quickly get experienced as distress. And there is a cumulative nature to this stuff. So it will get a little bit worse day by day. And at some point, people often will report that they feel like they go over the top of this bell curve. And so that's sliding into burnout. Burnout being a loss of energy in what you do, that a lot of times comes with cynicism. You start to doubt the value of your work. You start to doubt your competence. And a lot of people will say, I feel like my perspective is broken. I wasn't like this before. What happened to me? And it's like it could be burnout. And so ideally we want to check in on people before it gets to that point. But certainly if it gets to that point, we want to make sure that we can link people to resources. So the question becomes, how do you engage in a conversation around this stuff? Okay. That's where we get to the next point on the checklist. That's focusing on connection. These conversations can be difficult. They can feel really courageous. And my job right now is to make it a whole lot easier for you. So, some of you may be familiar with mental health first aid. I think that's a wonderful certification to get. And so, I would definitely recommend checking that out if you're not familiar. But you can also look at some frameworks for programs like this. So, this is a program called Are You OK? So, we're going to drop the link into the chat. It's a gorgeous website. If you are a website person, enjoy this one. It's beautiful. But I wanted to just walk through these 4 steps here. So let's say you have a concern about somebody, you start with the question, and the question can be as simple as, Are you okay? In fact, if that's all that you take from today's presentation, I'll take it. Because that question has saved lives, it will continue to save lives. So you ask, Are you okay? Or maybe you move to an open-ended question. But keep in mind, if that open-ended question is, Hey, how's it going? What are you going to get back? Drop it in the chat. In your region, what are you going to hear back? Fine. I'm good. How are you? Because we do this song and dance or nothing. Yeah. So I would be prepared to follow up, like, how are you doing really? So we ask the question and then we listen. And we don't listen to respond in the situation. We're actually listening to understand, which means that you give somebody space, you ask deepening questions. If they share something that's going on, you might say, just to make sure I understand this, do you have a recent example? Oh, you went through this before, you got through it okay. If you're comfortable with sharing what worked, right? And as you start to encourage action, you're asking more questions. Where do we go from here? What do you need from me? How can I best support you? Why questions? Because if you come in and direct somebody on how to live their life, if they already feel trapped in their situation, don't the walls just get tighter? So we're asking questions, we're offering choice, and as we're linking people to resources, we're going to check back in. Hey, I know that we talked about the EAP line if you have an EAP, right? Did you get through okay? Anything I can do to help on this? So a lot of times people talk about preparing for the conversation, and I would say in reality, it's probably going to be conversations. There is gentle persistence that often happens if you have a concern. We're going to talk about other resources you can tap into later if you have concerns. But I wanted to throw something out from my hospital days just to see if this is of interest to anybody. So, in my last hospital leadership job, we implemented something that's called Code Purple. So, if you've ever been in a hospital, you probably know that codes get called. There's code stroke, there's code sepsis, there's code blue for a medical emergency. Code purple is something else. Code purple is something that anybody can call, anybody in the hospital. They call it as an overhead page like any other code, and it signifies I need somebody to listen. And so my team had a cart, like you can see here. We filled it with Kleenex, we filled it with candy bars, and we would take off running. And all we did is listen. That was our job. I share this because I've talked to folks who are in different industries, and they found some really creative ways to take this hospital code and use it in their own work. One of the things that's come up is they'll have a group chat and somebody can call a code purple, right? And that's, hey, can anybody get on the phone with me? Because I'm having a tough time right now. And so I'm just going to sort of leave this here if you want to take it and think about it. But this is something that I find really helpful for just signifying and actually showing we are here to connect. We're not going to ask you to do anything else. We're just going to listen. Number 3. Okay. This is modeling ripple behaviors. Okay. This is thinking about what are the behaviors when you think about a culture of well-being during the holiday season, what are the behaviors that you want to see spread in your team? What are the behaviors that you want to see spread across your organization? Let's keep going. What are the behaviors that you want to see spread across your community? I'm going to get even bolder. What are the behaviors you want to see spread across the world? Because the reality is the way that you show up matters, not just for you, but it's going to spread. And we know this because of the concept of social contagion. So, social contagion says that there is a spread of behaviors, attitudes, and affect across populations. This has been something that has been observed and written about since the 1800s. It's not a new concept, although the research is a little bit more modern. So, mid 20th century and later, we got deeper into the research on this. But we know that the way that we show up matters. It spreads. And so I'm going to give you a phrase. If I could boil down all the research into one single phrase, it's this. There's more that's caught than taught. So when you are thinking about a culture of well-being, I would move beyond just telling people and reminding people that self-care is important. Okay. And really start thinking about how do you show up and signify that self-care is something that you take seriously. There's more that's caught than taught. I'm going to show you how this plays out. And I've seen this many times, and I've experienced this in workplace cultures. I have worked for organizations that will say sleep matters. We care about sleep. We actually care about sleep so much. We're going to bring in a sleep fitness expert. We're going to do a sleep fitness program. We're going to give you a sleep journal. But that same leader that tells you how important it is emails you at 3 o'clock in the morning. More is caught than taught, right? Because I'm going to look at that and say, oh, I guess we need to work through the night. And I've actually had conversations with leaders where they've told me, I did send that email. Yeah, it's true, but it's because I woke up in the middle of the night and I couldn't sleep. I thought it would be easier to send the email, schedule the email to go out the next day. Because whether or not you like it, we send signals all the time. If you even just think about system perspective, right? You have the action of an individual that will start to spread across a group. Well, all of a sudden, that starts to shape the team norms, and those team norms start to reinforce actions of individuals. It can get overwhelming to think about, but I always go back to a very wise person, Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. We have power no matter what. So we need to think about how are we going to show up in a way that we want to see this stuff spread. So I'm going to toss this back to you all. I want you to put in the chat, what is a ripple behavior that you would like to see spread in your organization over the holiday season? Also, I just want to do a shout out for the person who said earlier when we were talking about connecting, just saying, I'm here. Totally, totally. Okay, and I'm seeing a lot of things about kindness. Because I know you're a savvy bunch, I'm going to push you one step further. When you think kindness, what is the very specific behavior that you think of? Ooh, okay. So actually disconnecting from work and not responding when you have time off. Yeah, because if you respond, it is sending a signal that your time off maybe doesn't really matter, that that boundary isn't there. And I would say if you're taking time off, think about how you could make this visible. I once worked with somebody who had the most amazing out of office replies. She'd take a picture. Here I am. Here's what I'm doing today. I'm taking time off. I will not be responding today. If something's urgent, here's who you can contact. I'll be back on this date. And I was like, that's so cool. I'm so happy for her. Right? But that feels like a permission slip of, oh, I can take time off too. Same if you have an out of office, like if you go to lunch, show it. You don't have to hide this stuff. If you want to create a culture where it's okay to take time off for lunch, you may need to signify that you yourself do that. So I'm seeing a lot about teamwork, helping. And so think about for helping, what does that look like specifically? Same for teamwork. I would get to the most specific thing that you can experiment with. And this could be when you walk in, you're going to wave and say, hi, how was your weekend? It can be that small because it's not small. It's not. That could really make a difference because somebody's going to say, wow, I was really seen. Versus if you walk in, you're not paying attention and you walk past somebody, that sends a signal as well. Shout outs. Yep. Smiling. Here we go. Yep. And actually, with smiling, there's really interesting research on smiling. A lot of times, the bigger the expression, the more people feel that in terms of social contagion and emotional contagion. So I know a cheesy smile can feel cheesy. There's some science behind it. I'm seeing the smiles come through in the emojis. Perfect. Okay. Number 4 on your checklist, think about, are you celebrating the wins? When we get to the end of the year, this is a great time to slow down and celebrate some wins. But of course, this is also the time where people get really busy. I would say for this, a lot of times when I work with companies, they will say, I am concerned about celebration because of budget, especially this year. And I will tell you, from working with different teams over the years, the celebrations that I think I have seen that have been the most meaningful have not required any money whatsoever. So I'll give you a couple examples here. End of year PowerPoint decks. Collect the accomplishments of people on your team. Put some pictures up. Where have you been this year? It's just a reminder, right? You play that, you celebrate it. The other thing that I've seen that's really fun, because a lot of you were talking about end of year goals, is come up with a theme song. What is a song, and maybe your team can vote on it, that you are going to play as you hit your milestones, and then that song you're going to play when you hit the final goal? Doesn't cost anything. And you could look at this stuff and say, well, why does this work, right? Here's my theory on this. My theory is that this is a dopamine thing. So, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that we have in our brain. It is responsible for motivation, it's part of the reward center in the brain. And so, I'm going to ask to see who my people are. How many of you feel like you get a little too extra happy when you check something off a to-do list? Maybe to the point that you're putting stuff down that you have already completed because you just need to check it. Where are my people at? Yep, okay. I have at least one dopamine fan. That's dopamine. Somebody said list maker for sure. It's satisfying. And so if we know how we feel when we check something off, then from an org level, from a team level, we need to be thinking about how do we encourage the flow of dopamine so people can feel that satisfaction. So I'm tossing this one back out to you all for your collective wisdom. What are the things that you have done that have really helped for signifying like we have checked this thing off the list? And as you drop in, I want to call out, we had a really good comment that came through, plus one on this one. When we're thinking about celebration, knowing the introvert versus the extrovert, totally. And if you think about this, a lot of times with companies, they'll have a survey that goes out right when you start your job. And it's, do you prefer public or private? But even earlier today, I was working with a group just on this topic. And so I asked people the question. A lot of people said they love public. And I said, cool, let's pretend that you log onto LinkedIn and you see a picture of yourself you didn't expect to see. And there's 20,000 comments on there. And they're like, oh no, I don't like that. So we have to move even beyond just asking public versus private and get specific because in 2025, this can look a lot of different ways. And if you imagine you're out in nature, you have that many sets of eyes on you, that's probably not good news. So it makes total sense that people are uncomfortable with that. And so, yes, we do want to respect that. Yeah, and here we go. And I get this. Somebody said, I'm off to the next thing as soon as it's done. I never seem to stop to breathe. That has been one of my weaknesses as well. And because of that, one of the things that I did to make sure I didn't skip this step is in my project plans, if I have a project document, I make that part of the thing that I talk about with a sponsor at the very beginning. How are we going to celebrate success? That way it's streamlined into my process. I don't forget about it. We bake it in. It becomes a really formal part of that planning. Somebody else does that too. Yeah. The other thing I've come to realize is I think for some of us, we don't feel like we need that because we're motivated to get started. But there are people who are different than us, in the sense that they need that formal moment to just say, like, yeah, we did it, team, let's go. And so even if it's not as important to you, you may be thinking about, is it important to someone else? As you all may be thinking about, how do we support dopamine release? I also think about things like visual trackers. Anything that's got like the green, hey, we did this thing. It can be at the end of the project, it can be at the end of a meeting, but yeah, I think it's important to have that moment of we did this, we pulled this off. It's really good. Yeah, yeah. And somebody said it feels like projects are never ending. I think especially when this stuff becomes extended, it becomes ever important to be thinking about the small wins along the way because you may be waiting a long time to get to that end of the project. And so, what are those milestones? And that becomes really important from a dopamine perspective because if you get that first step done and you feel that check, it's like, wow, that felt good. Again, dopamine is responsible for motivation. So it tends to get people to want to go to the next step. And so I would break those things down and really think about how do we make sure celebration is going on throughout the year. Okay. Number five, make recharging the norm. So with recharging, I love a good framework. I'm always thinking about frameworks. The 3M framework is my absolute favorite. This comes from Dr. Sahar Youssef at UC Berkeley. This is based off of her research. She says ideally we have a blend of three different types of breaks. We have our macro, which is a half to a full day off in a month. We have a meso break, which is 1 to 2 hours in a week. And then last but not least, we have micro breaks, 2 to 10 minutes throughout the day to psychologically pull ourselves away from our work. My challenge for you all right now is when you think about your micro breaks, how do you make sure people are aware of them? Because more is caught than taught. The other thing that I'm going to challenge you all to think about from a culture perspective is how do you get the language out there? I once worked with a company, they were really struggling with getting their employees to take breaks. And so I did some training and they implemented the micro break, meaning that they would use that language. And so people would verbalize it. They were in the office together. Hey, everybody, I'm going to take a micro break for 5 minutes. Anybody want to join me? Social contagion. The next thing you know, everybody's talking about micro breaks, and it became okay because they could say the word out loud. And so you want to think about how vocabulary can also play into culture shift here. How do you take your micro break and make sure that people are aware that you're doing it as well? And that can be as simple as if you're going to step out, if you have any sort of signal that you're out of your office or out of your cube, whatever that looks like, hey, I'm taking a walk for 5 minutes. Or if you have a group chat, here's a picture from my walk that I just took. All of those things are going to help spread that. Now, if we think about goal setting, this is number six. I'm sure that many of you have seen this framework of SMART goals. I I stand behind SMART goals. I think these principles are wonderful, and I've seen SMART goals not be so smart. I've seen them not work for teams. And a lot of times when I work with teams, I get the eye rolls. Oh gosh, not the SMART goals. The thing is, if you make a SMART goal and you don't look at it again, it doesn't work. We know that. The other thing is, I think a lot of times we come up with the SMART goal and we think it's the good, healthy stretch like you see here. But in reality, what's going on is it's more like it's too much. And the reason that it's too much is that a lot of times we forget about the achievability of this. And so, with achievability, I think it's really important to look at your data. What's your baseline? What's your historical data? And get some feedback from teams. There's a practice that's called catch ball, and this comes from lean. And high level, what this means is you have a leader who tosses or, throws the ball to their team and says, "Here's a goal I'm thinking about for our group. What do you think?" And they will throw it back with their suggestions, their adjustments that they think would be good, their data that they have. The leader looks at that and says, "Does this work with our bigger goals? I think we need to tweak it." And they toss the ball back and forth to each other. That's getting feedback and working that feedback into your goals to make sure it's achievable. So I would check your goals on this. And folks, last but not least, do not forget to support your supporters. Trauma refers to anything that creates a sense of overwhelm that makes it difficult to respond or cope. People who are caring for other people can sometimes feel that sense of overwhelm when they see somebody go through something difficult and they can't do anything about it. So, a lot of people will talk about this as the cost of caring. Can look like the things we talked about earlier, lower productivity. You might have turnover. There could be friction among staff. And so, Are You Okay is a great framework to think about how to support your supporters. But at the end of the day, it's really two things. You are connecting human to human and you're linking to resources. That's the role that everybody can play. So, know your resources. I'm sure many of you do in your capacity, right? If you have an EAP, know what those benefits are. Wellness programs, 988. We're going to drop the 988 number into the chat. This is the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. I want to encourage you to look at this website if you've never been on it, because this is a lifeline that's not just for suicidality. This could be for somebody having a panic attack. This could be for a teen who's bullied at school. And you will learn if you look at the website that this is also a number that you can call, text, and chat online. Just last night, I checked out Missouri's 988 site just to refresh myself. They have video calls on there now. So there's a lot of ways that your employees could tap into this. Maybe you have training, you encourage people to take time off. My question for you is, what resources would be helpful for you right now? because you are supporting supporters. What do you need to be okay? Because at the end of the day, self-care is not selfish. You can't pour from an empty cup. And so you also need to be thinking about how do you intentionally meet your own needs and how do you access these resources and pull these things into your world because you matter too. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here, and I want to take questions. So I think we've had a few things that have come through. So let me take a look at these. Okay, this is a really good question. I'm going to read this out loud. So, how can leaders, HR, managers, learning and development convey the reality of social contagion without placing the burden of the individual to show up better? Yeah. So, when staff are burnt out, they often feel like they're told it's on them. They should be more adaptable, more resilient. How can leaders influence social contagion towards the positive without shifting the responsibility? What a beautiful question, because what you don't want to have happen is ignoring the realities of your system, ignoring the realities of, chronic stress that's going on in the workplace. And I think where this could go wrong is it could start to move into the realm of something that a lot of times is referred to as toxic positivity, which sounds like just think positive, right? Just show up with your big cheesy smile. If that's all we shared, that can be misconstrued, absolutely. And it implies it's so simple when a lot of times it's not. So, plus one to asking that question. When I think about this, I actually go back to the phrase that more is caught than taught, because if we're teaching this stuff, I think it may not stick. When we're thinking about showing up and having the behaviors that we want to see spread, a lot of times that becomes contagious and we don't need to necessarily explain social contagion. And so my initial thought is be thinking about what those ripple behaviors are that you can embed. And I always tell folks, especially if we have anybody from HR that does onboarding, I always tell folks start thinking about ripple behaviors from the moment that somebody onboards. So what I see a lot of times happen is when you onboard, you're going to tell people like, oh, make sure that you're empathetic at work, right? And maybe you can tell me how many people teach about empathy and onboarding, which by the way is a great thing to talk about. Does anybody have empathy as a core value or something that you train on? If you have this in your program, one of the things that I would suggest that you think about compassion, here we go. I would really be thinking about for whoever your trainers are or your onboarding specialists, how do they demonstrate that in action? So it's not just something that's taught, like just be nice to everybody, right? But if they get faced with a tough question or they have resistance or someone says, I'm actually having a lot of problems with my onboarding process, if that person just breezes past it, more is caught than taught. So you want to be thinking about, again, what are those specific behaviors that you can have those folks show up with so that that's the message that gets conveyed of like, it's okay to bring up concerns here, and I'm going to show healthy ways to manage what you're sharing with me. So yeah, and somebody said we talk about it but lack the training. And so, by the way, you are not alone. A lot of organizations I work with say that that's kind of where they're stuck at, that this might be something that's on a PowerPoint deck, but they're not thinking about ripple behaviors. And so that may be a takeaway. So I think for leaders, talking about this is really important. But to your point, I could absolutely see an unintended consequence if what you're saying is make sure you smile. I think about that as the buttons that have the smiley face, and staff are like, you're not listening to me. So I totally agree with that. And I think the other thing too is in the process of all of this stuff around culture change, you need to make sure that when people have these challenging emotions, they know that it's okay to talk to you. And so the reminder for everybody, and I remind myself this all the time, there's not a bad emotion. There can be a comfortable versus an uncomfortable emotion, but there's not a bad emotion. And when you create a space where people feel safe to name how they feel, even in these moments that it's uncomfortable, you are supporting them. If you've heard the phrase name it to tame it, there's real brain science behind this because what happens if you can turn your feeling into a word, you're going to have a situation where the amygdala or the alarm center in the brain starts to calm down and the prefrontal cortex lights up, which is the part of the brain that's really good at critical thinking. So at work, a lot of times we're trying to get there. So I would say, as much as you want to think about how you show up, you also want to make space for these uncomfortable feelings because as people can talk through those, they can, in a sense, name it to tame it. And that's an important step for moving towards a resolution. Okay. What other questions do you have for me? Keep them coming. And by the way, if you're dropping questions in, the Q&A is a great place to put those. Taking a look at the chat too. I have them both open.
Jesse, I'd love to hop in just for a moment
Sure.
and piggyback on some excellent comments that you've made throughout this webinar. I used to teach a course fairly consistently on it's called Emotions Revealed, Decoding the Seven Universal Facial Expressions. But really,
Hmm.
it's a talk about emotions and how they surface, how they manifest, especially on the face. And I've always told my attendees, right, my eager students, emotions are energy in motion. Right?
Hmm.
It's information, but it's also influence. And just like a cold or COVID or flu, and you kind of made this analogy
Hmm.
earlier, people can catch that from you. They can catch your energy, and just such a good habit, I think, to get into on a daily basis and even throughout the day to just kind of do a self check. Where's your energy? Because people, like you said, are catching it. Where's it at? And if they're not catching it per se, there's still influence there,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. And, Ryan, to your point, with facial expressions in particular, I had been working with a coach on speaking, and I share this just to make the point. Every Saturday, I would meet with this coach, and we were talking about how to use your facial expressions. And what I learned in this process is it's actually very difficult to manipulate your face in a conversation. It's very difficult. That's why TV actors are spending all their time trying to figure it out. What I learned for myself in this process is it's much easier to change the story that you tell yourself and let that come through in your face. So, for
yeah,
instance, if you're going to have a conversation with somebody and you assume it's a battle, that tends to show up on your face. If you have a conversation with an employee and you tell yourself, you know what, I'm going to learn something new about myself or them today, that shows up on your face and you lean in and you ask questions. This feels so much easier to change than all of this. And so, if you ever struggle with this piece, go back to this piece.
yeah. Yeah, that's it's such a great point. And that similar questions I would get from my audience. I used to get quite a bit the question, how can I be a better poker player?
Yep.
And I'd
Yep.
say, believe that you're a better poker player.
Yep.
Right? Or increase your skills and your competencies on how to be a better poker player because that's going to come across more authentically than
Hmm.
you trying to fake it. Good poker players can read through that,
Hmm.
right? Those fake expressions.
Hmm.
So yeah, great point, Jesse. I think the best way to control or to portray positive body language is to first embrace a positive mindset.
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely. Thank you, Ryan, for that. And I see a few questions came through. There's one about in regards to legal lines. I'd love to get a little bit more detail just to make sure I speak to that appropriately. So as you may type that in, I'm going to take a look at, yeah, here's a great phrase. So the thing I learned in the Marines, it says, is praise in public, criticize in private. Isn't that the solution to so many problems? I would say for constructive feedback, location is very important. People can feel very, very vulnerable. And so absolutely. Praise in public depends on the person. So there are some people that will thrive. I have worked with people as a leader where I've praised in public without asking the preferences. I had somebody pull me to the side once and she was like, Jesse, stop. I'm so uncomfortable. She said it was actually to the extent she thought about stopping her good behaviors because she didn't want me to do it. And so you don't ever want to set up a system where people actually actively work against it. And so that's why I would say get curious, like ask people what they prefer because you will come across some folks that may not do well in that environment. And so you want to make sure that those, recognition aspects or incentives are really set up to support and reinforce the behaviors you want to see. So, really good comment there. Good question. And yes, oh my gosh. So, tone of voice, let me tell you. So, the question is, can you talk about how tone of voice can affect company culture? It does. I had a participant, this was 2 years ago, and I will never forget this. I had her in a conference breakout session. We were talking about healthy communication. She's from Romania and she translated a phrase for me, and the phrase is, the tone creates the music. I always think about this phrase because if you listen to a song, you walk away with how you feel. Great. Why do you feel that way? It's probably the melody. Now, my lyricists are probably out there like, oh, come on. But really, a lot of times it's that tone in the music. The tone creates the music. So our tone and how we speak with each other creates the music or creates the culture of our organization. So tone is something that's really important. I also think that tone can be something that's difficult to give feedback on because it can feel vague. And so I would say if you're trying to give feedback on tone, get really, really specific. So for instance, let's just say somebody gets really elevated in their volume and they're speaking on top of somebody else. Those are the things I would say instead of saying you didn't have a good tone in that meeting. Because what is tone, right? And I always go back to what's the business implications because sometimes there's a difference in tone. That's just a difference in the person and there's no real business implication. It's just one person has a different tone than the other person. So you really want to reserve feedback for instances where there's a true business implication to it. And so I always do that double check before I talk about tone with people. Good question. Okay, let me take a look at this question that came through. Ooh. Yeah, and so, okay. So somebody's asking, like, what about crossing the lines? Let's say there's a performance issue that's caused by these changes in mood, energy, performance, etc. Yeah, how to identify with somebody, how to improve those issues without getting very personal. I think that there is a balance that happens in leadership where you can hold people accountable and also be understanding and empathetic, and that is a really hard place to be when we're giving feedback, it needs to be very specific about a behavior. And feedback in general is like, hey, keep doing this behavior or stop doing this or change it in some way because there's an implication to this, right? So I would say very, very objective, not making any assumptions and not also coming in trying to be supportive, but being like, oh my gosh, you look awful today. You look terrible. Are you okay? We don't want to do that because people are going to get defensive. So you can say something like, I noticed this week, you came a couple minutes after the start of our huddle. I'm just curious about that and wanted to check in. How you doing? Are things going okay? Right? They may share that there are some things, and then I would go back to impact. What's the business impact? What's the reason why it's important to be there on time? And then be thinking about how do I link them to resources that can support them in that. This is where if you have an EAP, EAPs are wonderful because they can really help bridge this gap of like, how do I help support this person's performance and also acknowledge they're a human being who's going through something. And so I love when I was a manager, I'd call my EAP and get management consultations done. I would say get an outside set of eyes on that. Yep. So Ryan, I'm looking at the clock. Do you want to step in?
Yes, thanks so much, Jesse. I need just a few minutes for closing comments, and then, of course, give you an opportunity to offer some closing comments as well. For those who have submitted questions, which we did not get a chance to answer due to time constraints, Jesse encourages you to reach out directly to her after the
Yeah.
webinar, and she can get those questions answered for you. Jesse, while I'm speaking, if you wouldn't mind maybe putting your contact info in the chat, or if you have a
Yeah,
slide that you could show,
absolutely.
that would be great too. Perfect.
Yeah, and by the way, really quickly, for the link that you all got earlier, and maybe we can drop that back in, you'll get access to the 7 essentials, but you can also get my contact information from the same link.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, I must say thank you so much for your excellent insights, your practical strategies to not just survive, but to thrive
Hmm.
during the holiday season and beyond. Couldn't have asked for a better topic and quite honestly, a better speaker to close us out for our Thrive 2025 series. So thank you, Jesse. Please let Jesse know what you thought about today's session by completing the post-webinar survey. That survey link will also be posted in the chat. Click on it. It's fast, it's easy, it's completely anonymous, and it helps us to keep selecting topics like today's and speakers like Jesse. If you can spare another minute inside that survey, we'll ask you to complete a brief testimonial. You don't have to, but if you particularly like something about today's topic, our speaker, the Thrive series in general, we'd love to hear from you. Next, as promised, please look in the chat for your HRCI and SHRM activity IDs. These will also be listed on your certificate of attendance, which will be emailed to all participants by end of day next Monday, along with a PDF copy of today's slide deck, and also Jesse's checklist, which you can download right now by clicking on the link in the chat. If you have additional questions for Jesse, something comes up today, next week, next month, feel free to reach out to her directly. You can see her information here on the screen. It's also going to be on her slide deck and on the checklist. You're also encouraged to reach out directly to your local ArcPoint Labs provider, especially if you have questions about ArcPoint's suite of employer solutions, such as policy development, drug testing, random program management, supervisory training, DOT physicals, background screening, OC health services, and most relevant to today's topic, we have a modern, comprehensive employee assistance program called Wellbeing Solutions. Now, what I'd like to do, because I have some time to do it, is shift gears for just a moment. And as we close out 2025, I want to take a moment to recognize the evolution of this Thrive series. Because of all of you and support from our corporate team, over the past 12 months, bi-monthly, we have trained more than 1,300 leaders from a range of professions and industries all across the US, designing conversations, right, that are created, constructed to help you build compliant, high-performing, safe, and healthy workplaces that thrive. Your engagement, your questions, your consistent feedback shaped every single session that we've offered. And we couldn't have asked for better partners to help us shape this growing learning community. On that note, I am so pleased to share that the Thrive series will continue in 2026. And we're raising the bar. In direct response to your comments and your requests, we are moving from an every other month cadence to a monthly series. Starting in January, Thrive webinars will continue to be held on the third Thursday of every month, our Thriving Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, 10 to 11 Pacific, but they will now be every single month. So you're going to get 12 next year. Your voice guided this decision, so please keep sharing your thoughts, give us your feedback. I can assure you we are listening, and it makes a difference. I'm also excited to announce our Q1 lineup on Thursday, January 15th. Marjorie Morrison, the mental health executive in residence for SHRM National, will help us begin the new year by continuing this important conversation about worker well-being. As we wrap up 2025 and look toward 2026, this topic could not be more timely for leaders who are focused on safety and performance, growth, and sustainability. On February 19th, DOT compliance expert Leslie Prince with Compliance Systems will walk us through what employers need to know about DOT drug and alcohol testing and compliance in 2026. And on March 19th, our colleagues at DSCI, Drug Screening Compliance Institute, Nick Hartman and attorney Bill Judge, will return for an encore presentation from their October presentation and talk to us about how we can design compliant and defensible drug screening programs for today's evolving workforce. Much more to come. Invitations for these free accredited webinars will be hitting your inbox soon. If you are not already signed up to receive webinar notifications, you can register in less than a minute by visiting arcpointlabs.com/webinars and complete the short form at the top of the page. And the link should now be in the chat or be in the chat soon. All right, we are nearing the top of the hour. We've covered a lot of ground in the past 60 minutes. Jesse, want to give you a chance to offer any closing comments or thoughts?
Okay, really quick. I know you said in the beginning, Ryan, but I want to make sure everybody knows if you enjoyed this and you want more free resources, I did start an internet talk show that's on topics like these. It's called Inside the Team. If you check out my website, which you all have the link, you will see a section for Inside the Team. Every episode has a free leader guide for how to have conversations with your teams about these topics. So there are many resources out there, and it's just going to keep growing. Last but not least, this is my final reminder. Please make sure to take care of yourself. Self-care is not selfish. You can't pour from an empty cup, and no matter what, you're worth it. So thank you for having me here.
Excellent message. Jesse, I can assure you, you earned at least one more subscriber. I won't speak for the other people
Wonderful.
on the call, but you've got one more.
Awesome. I might be up to 10 now, folks. So thank you. It's
Well,
brand new. So
you just started it, to be fair, right?
I did.
Awesome. Well, hey, on behalf of the entire ArcPoint team, a very special thank you once more to our guest, Jesse Favre, and to everyone attending, our loyal members and new members of the ArcPoint Network. Thank you for your time, your excellent questions, your feedback, and all of your support this past year. We are truly honored to serve as your single source employer solutions provider. And we wish you a safe, happy, and healthy holiday season and new year. We'll see you in 2026.
Thank you, folks.